Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Pozos, and here with me is my co-host and husband, Omar Pozos, and sweatshirt provider today because I'm wearing your oversized sweatshirt, and I just realized that as we turned the camera on that I kind of look like a bum.
I like it. I like when you wear the sweatshirts.
But today I wanted to talk about a question that comes up quite often, and that is a question around restriction. And ultimately,
Dun, dun, dun.
you know, I'll have people oftentimes say something along the lines of like, you know, I'm really struggling with weight loss. I'm really struggling with these PMS symptoms or bloating, gut issues, you know, low energy, like, you know, whatever kind of symptoms, different things that they're dealing with. And they'll see, you know, our client results. They'll see, you know, maybe me sharing about my story or, you know, whatever it is that kind of draws them into a conversation. And sometimes I'll have people say, you know, I really want to make these changes, but I'm afraid of feeling restricted. I don't want to be restricted. You know, I've done restrictive diets in the past. I want to make sure this is not going to be restrictive. And so with that, oftentimes I'll talk to people around this. And so I thought, you know what, this is something I would like to take to the podcast and talk a little bit more, because I think if I had done a podcast episode about this topic, like this question here of ultimately, like, do you have to feel restricted in order to, you know, balance your hormones and heal your gut and lose weight and all these different types of things that people want?
I'm curious what your answer is going to be right now.
My answer, I think, would have been so different, you know, maybe 2 years ago. Like, okay. This would have been a completely different podcast episode. And if I look back and I wonder, you know, why would my answer then be different than it is now? Well, we're going to talk about that today. And so ultimately, my answer nowadays is, well, one, I don't want you to feel restricted either. And that's something I definitely would have said, again, 2 years ago. But now this is where my approach today would be different from, you know, what I would say 2 years ago. And that is that ultimately, you feeling restricted in, you know, a kind of approach with nutrition and, you know, lifestyle changes, any kind of things that ultimately the approach that we want to take to achieve that result that we're after. If you feel restricted, that comes down to your own thoughts and just your thought patterns.
Your perception.
Yeah. And our thoughts about the changes, about the plan, all of that, ultimately our thoughts are going to be influenced by our current beliefs and, you know, our kind of past experiences. And so what I'm getting at here is that I'm not saying, you know, if it's your fault if you feel restricted and figure it out. No, not saying that by any means. What I'm saying and what I've come to learn and why my take on this has changed is I've come to find now, having worked with well over 1,000 women in Vital Spark coaching, I have come to find that I could take 5 different women and give them the exact same plan, and I would get different responses about, you know, if I asked them, how restrictive do you think this is? I would get completely different responses from all 5 women. And that's because when someone feels like a plan is restrictive, if they feel like a method is restrictive, it is ultimately a feeling that they have based on their own thoughts. And everybody thinks differently about things. And so that's where I've come to find that you know, as always, I've always preached that we can't do a one-size-fits-all approach. We can't do cookie-cutter plans. But what I've also come to find is that I can't guarantee you that this will or won't feel restrictive. But what I can guarantee you is that I can individualize a plan to you and help you make a process that feels less restrictive, as well as, and most importantly, I can work with you around your mindset, your thought patterns, your beliefs, your, you know, kind of understanding your past experiences and how that's influencing how you feel about certain processes today. I can work with you on that to help you change how you feel about something, so that ultimately, if there's a method that, you know, you want to do because you recognize that, you know, that method would get me the results I want faster, more effectively, and just like, you know, maybe better results, but it makes you nervous because you're like, I feel a little restricted around that. There's, you know, different toggles we can pull. We can change the plan, or we can change how we think about it. And there's different approaches we can take, and we do take different approaches with different people in that sense.
And I want to clarify here, Ness, to your point, like, restriction, like you're not talking about eating, 500 calories a
God,
day
no.
or anything like that. That's a little bit different, right? What we're talking about is maybe avoiding certain foods for a couple of months while you heal certain things, right?
Exactly.
Or, for example, for me, like, I know if you had asked me when I was a kid, like, you can never eat candy for the rest of your life, or you can never eat candy, I don't know, 5 days a week or whatever. But I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a little restrictive, right? As an adult, now my thoughts, my preferences, my priorities have changed. Therefore, I don't necessarily need to do something like that. Can I add another perspective too, if that's okay?
Sure.
So to your point about things feeling certain, or people feeling certain restrictions or different thoughts around a certain protocol. I think another way to look at it, and it's something that I've been told in the past, and I fall, I fall victim to this mentality at times too, is here's the thing. If you're anywhere within like, the US or a lot of our international clients that we talk to, for the most part, there's food, any type of food, within a couple of minutes of you wanting it. Meaning you can order it, you can go to a restaurant, you can go in a taxi, Uber, and go get it, right? We're all adults. We have that option to go get that certain food, that slice of cake, whenever we wanted to. However, for me, what had helped me in the past was when somebody told me this, they were like, hey, you're a grown man. You can go get that food whenever you want to. But you have to understand that if you want different things, you've got to do different, or if you want different results, you've got to do different things, right? And so it might feel a little bit tough. It might feel a little bit challenging to go through certain protocols, but that's okay, because that's what you want. That's why you're feeling the way that you're feeling, and you're doing the things you're doing so you don't feel that way anymore, right? And so I think that's a big reminder. It's like, hey, I get it. Like if I had a magic wand, and how many times do we get asked, like, if you had a magic wand, that'd be great, right? And they're like, ha, ha, ha. And I'm like, I would love to, but I'm like, that's not the way this works. That's not the way that, we need to learn about these things. That's not the way we need to focus on these things too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it would just be a lot like if someone says, you know what, I've noticed lately that I've been living paycheck to paycheck. I've, been like, every time I go and check my bank account, it's like in the negative. There's nothing really in there and it's stressing me out. I don't like the way that feels. So I want to start saving money. Mm-hmm. And then if they say that, but then they turn around, but I don't want to change any of my spending habits.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to check, how much I'm spending. I don't want to know how much I'm spending. I don't want to know, what I'm spending money on. And I don't want to change any of, like, I don't want to be told I can't buy something. I don't want to tell myself that I can't buy something whenever I want to buy it. It's like, okay, like I can understand that, but at the same time, those are essentially two opposing wants there. And, if we want both of those, one of them is going to have to give in one way. And we also have to recognize that if we want to have kind of marry the two and have a little bit of each, then both of them are just by default going to be, not as like intensive results, you could say. So it's like, if you're like, well, I don't want to have to track everything I spend, but I do want to start saving money, then there's methods to do that, but it probably isn't going to be as effective as tracking what you spend.
Yeah.
And so that's where ultimately, when it comes to, like we're talking about here, of if we have a goal of, I want to lose weight, I want to, balance my hormones so I don't have PMS symptoms anymore, I want to have better energy, and I want to heal my gut so that I'm not bloated or, having to worry about how different foods affect me or having achy joints or skin issues. It's like, okay, I want these things. Then we have to also look at, okay, but, I also want to be able to just eat whatever I want in the moment. I want to have alcohol every single day. I want to eat, like your example, I want to eat candy every single day. I want to just, not plan out what I'm going to eat. It's like, okay, those are two opposing things, and not saying that either is right or wrong, but we have to recognize if we want both of those things, some area is going to have to give. So if we want that level of flexibility and freedom when it comes to our food behaviors and choices, then we have to acknowledge that we might have to give on those other areas. We might have to recognize that that might mean that we're going to be low energy. We're going to have the achy joints. We're going to be bloated. We're going to have PMS, and we're going to continue to not lose weight, maybe probably gain weight. So we have to just be honest and be reflective with ourselves of what do we ultimately want and why do we want those things, and let that guide our decision making. And then when we determine our plan, and this is where obviously I'm a huge proponent for having a coach to help you navigate this and help you figure out what is best for you. Our coaches are incredible at never putting what they think someone should do or believe or feel around these things. They really help you figure out what are your goals, how do we want to go about that. Here are proven strategies we can take. Basically We make recommendations on the strategies on the plan, and individualize it to the person based on what they express as their goals, of course, what symptoms they're specifically dealing with, what their health history looks like. So what have they done in the past? What has their body been exposed to? All these different things. And then of course we further tailor that based on lab work, which we love to do really incredible functional lab work that gives us a lot of great information. Now, with all of that information, myself and my coaching team, we're going to make recommendations of, hey, based on what we're seeing here and based on what you want to achieve, here's how we recommend getting there. Here are some different strategies we can use. Here's what an example of a, plan or protocol might look like for your nutrition, for certain supplements, for certain lifestyle changes, workout behaviors, all these different types of things. And then when we, kind of present that to a client, it is ultimately their choice on whether, some clients, they might say, that's awesome, that's perfect, let's do it. Whatever you think, let's do it. I might have some clients that come back and say, that sounds great. I also I want to get there as fast as possible and I want to get, the best result possible. Is there anything else you think we can do? I'm good with you making this harder, more intense, because oftentimes we don't give the most intense version of a plan offered, because most people, don't want that. And most people would struggle with that anyway. I know I would. But sometimes people do come back and they say I am all in, just give me anything you think I can do. Let me know, I'm going to do it. And in which case we might, intensify the plan. One might label it as, but really more so just adding more things to work on. But for, some other people, then you might kind of offer hey, this is what we're kind of thinking. And they might say, you know what, I'm kind of nervous about that, or I don't know about this aspect, or, this kind of feels like something I've tried in the past that I had a bad experience with. Can we talk about some different ways of doing this? Or I need to understand that better. And this is the magic of coaching. This is why I don't and probably will never, sell one-time plans to people, because it doesn't work. It doesn't take into account people's personalities, lifestyles, beliefs, and just all, their past experiences.
Dieting history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that is where ultimately then it comes down to, if someone expresses I feel restricted with this approach, and it might take trying it before they kind of can start to feel okay, how do I feel about this? Then we can, again, take a look at kind of two options here. We can look at the approach. We can look at, okay, if we feel this plan, I am feeling restricted, then we can adjust the facts of the plan, the circumstances around it. Or we can also look at what is causing us to feel restricted around this. Let's, get curious about this. And sometimes, maybe if we have some emotions around it, of course, let's regulate our emotions first. Let's make sure that we are in a very, centered, grounded place. And let's take a step back and let's ask ourselves, what thoughts am I having around this? What am I thinking that is about this that is feeling restricted? Because we tend to just take circumstance and feeling and just think the circumstance is causing the feeling. But no, it's not the circumstance causing the feeling. It's our thoughts about the circumstance. And that's why two different clients can have to look at the same circumstance and can feel differently about it, right?
Yeah.
So let's ask ourselves some questions. What are we thinking about it? Let's explore those thoughts. Okay, I'm having these thoughts around this. Are those thoughts true? What evidence do I have to suggest that those thoughts are absolutely true? What is kind of underneath this? What are some, maybe what's leading me to think this? What are some deeper thoughts or just some beliefs, or, sometimes these are really deep subconscious things we have to spend some time even journaling on, reflecting on, what about this is what's coming up for me right now? Typically it ties back to past experiences. I gave the example of maybe someone did, like you said, they did the 500 calorie diet in the past. And then, we're talking about, hey, let's eat a little bit less calories. And even though obviously we're not, doing a 500 calorie diet, maybe it's let's eat a 1500 calorie diet for a smaller person. And they might be at the last time I counted calories, I was eating 500. That felt really hard. That felt really restrictive. So now I feel in general, counting calories is restrictive. And that's where that's a false belief, because your brain is just creating associations, as our brains do, and it's drawing association. It's trying to make a fact out of a thought and a belief. So we need to kind of dismantle that belief a little bit and find other examples to suggest that maybe that's not entirely true, and we can decide if we want to continue to believe that or if we don't, and that's ultimately a choice. So there's a lot of things we can dive into. We can ask, what is another way of looking at this? If I thought that way about it, how would that make me feel? so many different questions we can ask here.
I mean, here's a perfect example, right? So even just a subtle like change of word, like for example, if you're like, I have to stop eating gluten, I have to stop drinking alcohol, I have to stop, I have to, and instead you literally just change that to be like, hey, I actually get to work on my health and fitness. I get to heal my body inside and out. I get to work alongside an expert team of coaches that can help me navigate these things. I mean, just that subtle little difference there makes such a big difference. Or to your point, Ness, about like, making those over, I guess those like extreme examples where you're like, well, calories, they're terrible, they're awful, or, counting macros, they're terrible, they're awful just because I've done it in the past. It's like, and we use this a lot within our own team, but it's like, hey, think of it like this, right? It's like you married a person and you got a divorce, and now all of a sudden you're like, well, men or women, they all suck. They're all really shitty. And the reality of it is there's really crappy guys out there. There's really crappy girls, but there's also good ones, right? And so again, at times when we don't know how to correctly use a certain functionality like tracking macros or, whatever a gut or hormone protocol is, and all of a sudden we just do this blanket statement where you're like, yeah, everything is restricted, everything is terrible, you do come away from that experience doing yourself a disservice because you don't know how to go about it the right way, or most importantly, you don't know how to think about it the right way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I love that analogy because we can also...
one?
The kind of like the dating, the boyfriend, the relationship one, because this is a perfect example too of how we have different kind of toggles we can pull of if we feel a certain way, we know that it's not a circumstance that causes us to feel that way, it's our thoughts about the circumstance. And so we know if we want to feel differently, we can change our thoughts or we can change the circumstance. Most people want to change the circumstance, but that might not be the best thing. And so kind of circling back into your example there around the kind of the bad relationship, right? Let's say let's say you are dating someone who is abusive and that person is, verbally abusive to you. And you're coming to me and you're talking about how like, I just feel horrible. I feel terrible right now because, he's saying this, he's saying that, and all these different things. In that circumstance, I'm not going to just encourage you to like, hey, let's just change our thoughts around it. Like, you're being really abused here, but like, let's just think differently about the situation so you can feel differently. Like that would be an example of, hey, let's change the circumstance. Right. Let's also, though, alongside that, we still, of course, want to work on our mindset because now we go into another relationship with a person who is not abusive, who is a great match for you, but everybody is human. Everybody has maybe their flaws, and there might be something that person does that now triggers you a little bit. Now you find yourself having another emotional reaction, coming to me and, complaining about this person, saying, well, he did this and now I'm feeling really bad for this reason, different things. In that instance, I might not say, hey, let's dump him and let's go keep finding the next person and look for the unicorn circumstance, the unicorn person that's never going to cause you to feel that way. Let's instead look at, there are certain aspects of this that maybe we can't change. We can't change other people, but we can change your thoughts around it. We can change ultimately your kind of deeper beliefs and the stories you're telling yourself, what you're making things mean. So all of this ultimately meaning our thoughts, and that will change how you feel. And if we feel differently, then we're going to have different outcomes, different results. We're going to have a beautiful relationship, not because we found the perfect person, but because we're doing the work ourselves. So hopefully the other person is also doing work, but we're doing the work ourselves to where, we're ultimately just working on our inner dialogue, our own thoughts. Yeah. It is the same thing with our nutrition, our fitness, our lifestyle changes, all the things that maybe need to happen in order to achieve that result that we want with our body, with our health. We can continue to look for like the unicorn, the magic approach that never makes you feel any type of, feeling of restriction or any negative feelings. You can continue to be on that chase, forever. But the reality is you probably are going to be on that chase forever because it's rare that you're going to find something that you don't ever feel any form of discomfort. And that's the issue, is a lot of people mistake discomfort for restriction, and they think restriction means that is something that like I just need to change. I need it to not be restricted. I need it to not feel restrictive. But what if instead of looking for that unicorn approach, we still, of course, adjust and change things? Because just like the example there of, if it's the abusive relationship, we're going to get out of that relationship. So if it's a really bad plan, if it's a, 500 calorie starvation diet, let's get out of there. But if we find a good approach and, our history of the starvation diets we still have a little bit of triggering. We still have some feelings that come up rather than program hopping and plan hopping of trying different approach. What if we find an approach that we decide, you know what? This is an approach that I know will work. I know I can feel good about this approach. And when those feelings of discomfort come up, when I sometimes feel just uncomfortable, I feel nervous, I feel, worry, like whatever kind of those negative emotions come up, rather than saying, let me jump ship and change the plan, I'm going to turn inward. I'm going to, hopefully you have a coach that you can talk to about this. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to explore what's coming up for me. We're going to talk through why I might have these kinds of beliefs and thoughts, and I'm going to do the work internally instead of trying to change the external.
Yeah. Can you, if you want, can you give like a specific example of like what sort of questions you can ask yourself, or like how to kind of go about like challenging yourself a little bit there?
Yeah. So some of the thoughts that I, had mentioned earlier, of terms of, we can kind of ask ourselves, is that thought true? We can ask, what is leading me to think this? What might that thought be related to? So like, again, if the example here is, let's say I decide I'm not going to drink alcohol for 6 months. And one person you say that to, and they're like, no big deal, like easy. If you told that to me, 4 years ago, I would have been like, oh my God, I can't do that. If you tell that to me today, they're like, that's cool. I'm pretty much doing that anyway, like totally fine. So that's where it's like different people can perceive things differently. Now, if I have that feeling today and I'm like, man, like I don't think I can do that. That feels really restrictive. I don't think I can do that. Well, let me explore that thought a little bit. Okay, my thought here is I can't do that. Now, is that thought true? Not absolutely true, because I don't know. I probably can do it. What's actually true is just that that might feel kind of hard. It's like, okay, well, what is leading me to think that it's going to feel hard? Well, in the past, I did dry January, and during that month, I had a lot of feelings of hard, and by the end of the month, it felt really terrible. Or I don't know, maybe I went through a period of time where I decided not to drink alcohol. I was also doing all these other things, and my friend, she wanted to go out drinking, and she asked me, and then I felt uncomfortable, and so I ended up doing it, and then I had a bad experience. It's there could be a million things, and usually it ties back to our past experiences. So I always ask, what is this related to? What is that related to? What is that related to? What is the deeper thought? What is the deeper fear going on here? It's usually a fear deep down. Then I could ask myself, well, what is another way I could think about this? Not saying this is exactly the way I will think about it. I'm just exploring, what are my options on different perspectives? What might somebody else think about this? And I'm just trying on different outfits for size kind of a thing. Trying different perspectives, different thought patterns, and ultimately trying to find what is the thought that still feels true? Because if I'm trying to convince myself of a thought that I just purely don't believe, that's going to be useless. But if I can find a thought that is believable to me, that feels true, but also is a little bit better in the sense of it's going to create a different feeling response for me, because that thought of I can't do this, that makes me feel scared, makes me feel just crummy, right? But if I choose a different thought of this is going to maybe feel hard sometimes, but I am capable of doing hard things because I've done hard things before, that thought feels empowering. It's still honest. It feels true. But guess what? Now, when I have those feelings come up, now when my friend asks me, hey, you want to go grab drinks tonight? And that feeling comes up of oh God, here it is. I feel restricted. I can take a step back and be whoa. Remember my thought that I'm choosing here. Sometimes this is going to feel hard, but I can do hard things because I've done hard things before. I remind myself of that. I take a breath. I feel empowered. I tell my friend Susie, you know what? Thanks, Susie. I'm going to join you.
Susie.
I'm going to say, I'm going to join you. I'm going to grab a mocktail tonight. And she'd be like, awesome, cool, sounds great, right?
Yeah.
And if she doesn't, maybe try getting some new friends, because they probably have some deeper things that they need to work on if you not drinking next to them triggers them. But ultimately, it's just exploring how different thoughts can make us feel differently, and being careful about making these absolute labels to describe the way that we're going about things to achieve the results that we want. So that's what it all comes down to. I hope that this was helpful for you. This was truly just me kind of reflecting on how some of my beliefs and thoughts have changed over the years. And ultimately, that's, what I hope continues to happen. I hope that as I continue to educate myself, as I get, more reps under my belt of both my own transformation and just the more and more women that we help year over year, I hope that I can continue to expand my beliefs and ultimately bring more and new information to you guys here. So thank you so much for listening. If you found this helpful, do me a favor, send this to a friend or post it on your Instagram story and tag me so I can see it. That is how we can reach more people. And by reaching more people, we can grow so we can continue to give you guys great free information with, no ads, nothing here. This is purely just to serve you.
What's your Instagram so people can tag you really quick?
At Vanessa G Fitness.
Love it.
We'll be back next week. Make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss another episode.
Bye, everybody.